Hi, guys. Today we're going to be working on Lesson 9 Toad's Adventures. We have a whole bunch of learning targets for today. We want to be able to identify from which character's perspective the story is being told or being experienced. We're going to identify common themes throughout The Wind in the Willows. For instance, friendship, loyalty, responsibility, and irresponsibility as demonstrated through the characters. We need to demonstrate an understanding of literary terms such as author, characters, setting, dialogue, point of view, perspective, theme, narrator, and narration by using these terms and when we discuss Toad's adventures. We need to describe the traits, motivations, or feelings of Toad, the jailer's daughter, and the engine driver, and explain how their actions contribute to the sequence of events in Toad's adventures. Identify and express mental states and emotions of Toad and others in Toad's adventures. We're going to distinguish literal language from figurative language as used with the word pursued in Toad's adventures. And we need to make predictions prior to listening to the read aloud Toad's adventures about what will happen to Toad now that he's been sent to prison, based on the text heard thus far, and then compare the actual outcomes to our predictions. So let's look at our vocabulary words for this lesson. As you listen to the story today, be listening for these words. Disguise. Disguise is a noun meaning a costume that hides you or who you really are. Number 2 is distress. It's a noun meaning great difficulty, sadness, or pain. Number 3 is dungeon. It's a noun meaning an underground jail. Number 4, particularly. It's an adverb meaning especially or very much. And number 5, pursued. It's a verb meaning solved a problem by making do with what you had or invented. So we'll see in our story how these words are used. So let's discuss and remind ourselves what we have learned so far. So what is point of view? Point of view is the way the author chooses to have the narrator tell the story. There, we usually have some points of view as first-person point of view or third-person point of view. We'll talk about those in a minute. So which point of view does the author of The Wind in the Willows have the narrator use? The author actually uses third-person point of view. The author uses words like he, she, it, his, her, its, and characters' names when they're telling the story. So who is the narrator? The narrator is the voice the author uses to tell the narration part of the story. So let's get into some background information so far. Remember, we've heard some themes so far in Wind in the Willows. We've heard about friendship or loyalty, hospitality, responsibility, and irresponsibility. So when we've heard about those themes before in the story so far, would you consider Toad to be responsible based on his actions so far? I wouldn't. I would consider him to be irresponsible so far. So what examples from the previous read-alouds demonstrates Toad's irresponsibility? Remember, he didn't care about mending his wrecked caravan. He thinks nothing of getting into car accidents. He doesn't take care of himself. He steals a car. He doesn't think about the consequences of his actions. Some even say that he's a rotten apple that affects his friends' reputations. Those would all be great examples of irresponsibility. So what characters have a sense of responsibility in the previous read-alouds? kind of doing the right thing when people are not necessarily watching. Mr. Badger, Rat, and Mole would all have demonstrated responsibility in the previous read alouds. So let's talk about some examples that would demonstrate this. Rat and Mole make arrangements to have the caravan fixed. Mr. Badger, Rat, and Mole try to help their friend Toad by making sure he does not get into any more trouble. Now that Toad has been sent to prison, what do you think will happen? Do you think being locked up will teach Toad to mend his ways? And do we think that Mr. Toad will serve his 20-year sentence? So make some predictions based on Toad's character so far. So as we read today, listen carefully as I read Toad's adventures. Listen for key words that signify the third person point of view. Remember, those words were like his, her, its, characters' names, he, she, and it. And then as you read, think about your predictions that you just made about today's story and see if they're correct. Mr. Toad behind bars. When Toad found himself in a dark dungeon, he flung himself on the floor and cried, "This is the end of everything," he said. Imagine, Toad imprisoned for stealing a motor car and for lurid cheek. Stupid animal that I was. He reproached himself. With lamentations such as these, he passed his days, refusing his meals. Now, the jailer had a daughter who assisted her father. The jailer's daughter was particularly fond of animals. This kind-hearted girl said to her father one day, "Father, if you let me look after the toad, I'll make sure he eats." Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad. So that day, she knocked at the door of Toad's cell. "Now, cheer up, Toad," she said, "and dry your eyes. Please do eat some dinner. See, I brought you some of mine." It was Bubble and Squeak, and its fragrance reached the nose of Toad. But he stubbornly refused to eat. Instead, Toad wailed and would not be comforted. So the wise girl retired for the time. Bubble and Squeak is a traditional English dish made of leftover vegetables in which the main ingredients are potato and cabbage. It is often eaten with a meat roast, and its name comes from the sound the food makes as it cooks. A little tea for Toad. When the girl returned, some hours later, she carried a tray with a cup of fragrant tea steaming on it, and a plate piled up with hot buttered toast. Toad sat up, dried his eyes, sipped his tea, and munched his toast. Before long, he began talking freely. The jailer's daughter saw that this social interaction was doing Toad as much good as the tea. "Tell me about Toad Hall," said the girl. "Toad Hall," said the Toad proudly, "is a gentleman's residence dating from the 14th century. It is 5 minutes from church, the post office, and the golf course. Suitable for—" "Gracious," said the girl, laughing, "I don't want to buy it. Tell me something real about it. But first, wait till I fetch you some more tea and toast." She skipped away and presently returned with a fresh trayful, and Toad, munching on another piece of buttered toast, told her all about Toad Hall. They had many interesting talks together after that, and the jailer's daughter grew very fond of Toad. One morning, the girl spoke to Toad in an exceptionally thoughtful manner. Toad, she said, I need you to listen carefully. I have an aunt who is a washerwoman. What do you think a washerwoman does? A washerwoman's job is to wash laundry. There, there, said Toad kindly. Never mind. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen. Do be quiet, Toad, said the girl. As I said, I have an aunt who is a washerwoman, and she does the washing for all the prisoners. If you were to offer her some money, I believe she would let you have her dress and bonnet, and you could escape in disguise. You're very alike in many respects, particularly about the figure. In other words, the jailer's daughter thinks Toad looks like her washerwoman aunt. We're not, said the Toad in a huff. Toad, I'm trying to help you, exclaimed the girl. Yes, yes, I see. Thank you very much, said the Toad hurriedly. But you wouldn't surely have Mr. Toad going about disguised as a washerwoman? I suppose you want to escape in a horse-drawn carriage? The girl retorted. Toad began to see the error of his ways. You are a kind girl, he said. Please introduce me to your aunt. I am sure we can come to a mutually agreeable arrangement. Next evening, the girl ushered her aunt into Toad's cell. The sight of certain gold coins sealed the deal. In return for cash, Toad received a cotton print dress, an apron, a shawl, and a black bonnet. The only stipulation the old lady made was that she should be gagged and bound and placed in a corner of Toad's cell. This way, she hoped to escape the suspicion that she had helped Toad escape by making it look like she had been attacked. Toad was more than willing to oblige, and when the time came, he tied her up with great gusto. Now, it's your turn, Toad, said the girl. Take off that coat and waistcoat of yours. A waistcoat is a dressy vest. Disguise. Shaking with laughter, she helped him into the dress. You're the very image of her, she giggled. Now, good luck, Toad. With a quaking heart, Toad set forth cautiously. He was soon surprised to find that the washerwoman's squat figure, in its familiar cotton dress, opened every barred door, including the one that opened onto the outside world. In other words, Toad's disguise works, and everyone allows the washerwoman through. Toad immediately walked toward the nearest town. As he walked along, he spotted some red and green lights a little way off, and the sound of the puffing of engines. Aha, he thought, a railway station. He made his way to the station and found that a train, bound more or less in the direction of his home, was due to leave. More luck, said Toad as he went off to buy his ticket. He gave the name of the station that he knew to be nearest to Toad Hall and mechanically reached into his waistcoat pocket for his money. But here the cotton gown thwarted his efforts. As a line began to form behind him, the Toad slowly began to realize that not only was there no waistcoat in the gown, but there was no money either. Forgetting his disguise, the Toad commanded the attention of the clerk. I am Toad of Toad Hall. I've left my money behind, he offered. Give me a ticket, and I'll send the money on tomorrow. The clerk ignored Toad's request. Stand away from the window, please, madam, the clerk ordered. Full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform. What was to be done? As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being tended to by its driver. Hello, madam, said the engine driver. What's the trouble? "Oh, sir," said Toad, crying afresh, "I'm a poor washerwoman, and I've lost my money, and I can't pay for a ticket." "That's bad business indeed," said the engine driver. "Lost your money and can't get home? And you got some kids, too, waiting for you, I dare say." "Any amount of 'em," sobbed Toad, "and they'll be hungry and playing with matches." Why do you think Toad says that? "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do," said the engine driver. "If you'll wash some shirts for me when you get home and send 'em along, I'll give you a ride on my engine." Toad agreed and scrambled up into the cab of the engine. Of course, he had never washed a shirt in his life. The guard waved his flag, the engine driver whistled, and the train moved out of the station. Mr. Toad's Great Escape. They had covered many a mile when Toad noticed that the engine driver was leaning over the side of the engine. Then he saw him climb onto the coals and gaze out over the top of the train. Then he returned and said to Toad, "It's very strange. We're the last train running in this direction tonight. Yet I'm sure I heard another following us." Toad became alarmed. By this time, the moon was shining brightly, and the engine driver, steadying himself on the coal, could see more clearly the line behind them. Presently, he called out, "I can see it now. It's an engine coming along at a great pace. It looks as if we're being pursued." The miserable Toad crouched in the coal dust. "The engine is crowded with policemen and the strangest lot of people, all shouting the same thing." "Stop!" cried the engine driver. At that moment, Toad fell on his knees and cried, "Save me, dear Mr. Engine Driver! I am not a washerwoman. I am the well-known Mr. Toad. I have just escaped from prison." The engine driver looked down upon him very sternly and said, "Now, tell the truth. What were you being put in prison for?" "It was nothing very much," said poor Toad. "I only borrowed a motor car." The engine driver looked very grave and said, "I fear that you have been a wicked Toad, but you are evidently in distress, so I will not desert you." They piled on more coals. The engine leapt, but still their pursuers gained. The engine driver wiped his brow and said, "It's no good, Toad. They have the better engine. There's just one thing left. A short way ahead of us is a long tunnel, and on the other side of that, the line passes through a thick wood. I will put on all the speed I can while we are running through the tunnel. When we are through, I will put on the brakes. The moment it's safe to do so, you must jump and hide in the wood. Then I will go full speed ahead again." Mr. Toad jumps from the train. They piled on more coals, and the train shot into the tunnel and out at the other end. The wood lay dark and brooding upon either side of the line. The driver shut off the steam and put on the brakes. The Toad got down on the step, and as the train slowed, he heard the driver call out, "Now jump!" Toad jumped, rolled down an embankment, and scrambled into the wood and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train get up speed again. Then out of the tunnel burst the pursuing engine. It didn't take long for the Toad to realize that it was now very late and dark, and he was in an unknown wood. After so many weeks within walls, he found the wood strange and unfriendly. Toad walked until he could walk no further. At last, cold and tired, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree where he slept till the morning. Time to reflect. So think about these questions and try to answer them as you go through and remember the story. So how does Toad manage to escape the dungeon? Number 2, another train pursues the train Toad is on. Who is on that train? Number 3, what is the first thing Toad does once he escapes? And what happens at the station? Number 4, how is Toad able to get on the train? Number 5, who is chasing the train Toad is on? And how does Toad manage to escape the policeman this time? In your ELA journal, we're going to write just a few minutes for one of these 3 questions. You choose one and you're going to write your answer down. Be sure to use the standard conventions of written English, proper capitalization, punctuation, grammar, all that good stuff. So here are your 3 choices. Number 1, when Toad is in the dungeon, what is his state of mind? In other words, how does he act that tells you about what he is thinking? So how does he act that tells you about what he's thinking? Number 2, what theme is portrayed in today's read aloud? Tell me, how is Toad irresponsible? Number 3, if you were the jailer's daughter, would you have helped irresponsible Toad escape from the dungeon? Why or why not? Pause the video while you write your answer and then come back. So think, pair, share. This means you're going to stop after the question in just a moment and turn and talk to someone. Okay? I'm going to ask you a question. I'll give you a minute to think about the question and your answer. Then you're going to turn to someone and discuss the question. Now, since we're not in person, I can't really call on several of you to share what you discussed, but your teacher may ask you to. If you were the jailer's daughter, would you have helped irresponsible Toad escape from the dungeon? Why or why not? So think about it, pause the video, and then turn and discuss it with a friend or a neighbor or somebody at home. Our word work for today, the word is pursued. Say the word pursued with me. Pursued. Pursued means being chased after or followed in an attempt to be captured by someone or something. The squirrel was being pursued by the barking dog. Have you ever been pursued by anyone? Have you ever seen a person or an animal being pursued? Have you ever pursued anyone? Use pursued when you're talking about and telling about your experiences. For instance, I was pursued by, and then you fill in the blank. So what's the word we're talking about? The word again is pursued. In what part of speech is the word pursued? It's an action. So if it's an action, that means it's going to be a verb. Let's look at an extension activity. This is going to be talking about what do these words mean? Narrator and point of view. Remember, the narrator is who's telling the story. And the point of view is, are they telling it like they're in the story or they're witnessing the story? The jailer's daughter, that's who we're going to be talking about. Let me double check. As we listen to this part of the story, I want you to be thinking about the words that the author uses to kind of guide us on the point of view. Okay. Now, the jailer had a daughter who helped her father out at work. The jailer's daughter was particularly fond of animals. This kind of hearted girl said to her father one day, "Father, if you let me look after the toad, I will make sure he eats." Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad. So that day she knocked at the door of Toad's cell. "Now, cheer up, Toad," she said, "and dry your eyes. Please eat some dinner. See, I brought you some of mine." In this selection, we notice that those words that I kind of emphasized as I read it are all kind of telling us about the point of view from the story. Those are telling us that it's from the third person point of view. The third person point of view, remember, uses the words like he, she, it's, their, him. So, excuse me. First off, let me ask you, is there dialogue in this selection? Remember, dialogue is the words that are said directly from some character. And we see that in the first paragraph right here where we have, Father, if you let me look after the toad, I will make sure he eats. I have quotation marks around the words that she said. And then in the second paragraph, I look down where it says, now, cheer up, Toad, she said, and dry your eyes. Please eat some dinner. See, I brought you some of mine. Again, those are words that the jailer's daughter said, and they're set off with quotation marks. So that would be dialogue. So who is the only person directly speaking in this passage? The only person that's doing any speaking is the jailer's daughter. And the words that we used in here, like her, is in there. Her again. Her, she, him, he. Those are all telling us that we're in the third person point of view. Okay. If you were to change this passage to the first person point of view, you would be telling it from the jailer daughter's perspective through her eyes. So when I do that, I could reread the story here, this part of it, and change it into first person point of view. Listen as I do that. Now, the jailer had a daughter who helped her father out at work. The jailer's daughter was particularly fond of animals. This kind of hearted girl said to her father, not doing it right, you say, I am the jailer's daughter who helped her father out at work. I, instead of saying the jailer's daughter, am particularly fond of animals. I said to my father one day, Father, if you let me look after the toad, I will make sure he eats. My father replied that I could do what I liked with him. My father was tired of Toad, so that day I knocked at the door of Toad's cell. Now, cheer up, Toad, I said, and dry your eyes. Please eat some dinner. See, I brought you some of mine. When you're using I and me and my, then you've changed it into the first person point of view. The words that are in quotations, the dialogue, does not change. It stays exactly the same. Tomorrow, we'll be reading about the further adventures of Toad, part 1. Have fun!